The wind howled through the empty streets, slicing through fur and flesh alike, as if the city itself were alive, angry, and relentless. In the midst of the frozen desolation, a single figure limped forward through the snow. His once proud form reduced to little more than a walking skeleton. His name was Shadow, though no one called him that anymore. He was just a stray now, a forgotten creature wandering a city that had no place for him. 6 months ago, Shadow had known warmth. He had known a family. His paws had once danced joyfully across soft carpets, and his head had rested on a warm bed beside a fireplace. He had a purpose then, a role to play, but all that was gone now. His family had moved, and they had left him behind without a second thought. All that remained were empty spaces. Spaces once filled with love and laughter, now only echoes of what had been. Now, Shadow was nothing more than a shadow of his former self, limping through alleys in search of food, warmth, and a place to sleep. The cold had become his constant companion, biting into his bones, making each step feel like a burden. His ribs jutted out beneath his matted fur, a constant reminder of the hunger he had endured for days. He had eaten little more than scraps, the occasional half-eaten sandwich tossed carelessly by a distracted passerby. But those moments were rare, and Shadow had learned to survive on nothing but his instincts and the faint hope that things might one day change. Tonight, the weather had taken a turn for the worse. The temperature had dropped dangerously low, and weather alerts had warned residents to stay indoors. Yet, as always, Shadow had nowhere to go. The shelters that had once taken him in had turned him away. Too full, too busy, too many strays like him. Shadow stumbled, his front leg buckling beneath him. He crashed into the snow, his body trembling uncontrollably. For a moment he didn't move. What was the point? His body ached, his stomach was empty, and his soul felt just as hollow. Perhaps this alley would be his final resting place. There was a strange peace in that thought, an acceptance of the inevitable. He closed his eyes, feeling the cold seep deeper into his bones. But then, through the howling wind, he heard it. A cry, faint, weak, almost imperceptible. Shadow's ears perked up. He raised his head slightly, uncertain if he had imagined it. The cry came again, louder this time, filled with desperation and helplessness. It wasn't the mewling of a stray cat or the squeal of a rat. It was something different, something primal stirred within him. Instinct kicked in, the instincts that had been honed over generations of selective breeding, instincts that were not just about survival but protection. Shadow forced himself to his feet, each movement sending sharp pain through his body. His legs shook, and his vision blurred. He didn't know where the cry was coming from, but something deep within him, drove him forward. He limped, following the sound, his head held high despite the weakness in his body. The cry grew louder as he navigated through the alley, past overflowing dumpsters and frozen puddles. It was a sound he couldn't ignore, a sound that seemed to call out to him. His heart, though weak, beat faster, spurred by a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in months. The alley narrowed, and then, turning a corner, he saw it. The baby. The baby was lying in a small bundle, half buried beneath a pile of discarded trash bags near an abandoned building. Its blanket, thin and soiled, offered little protection from the harsh cold that gripped the city. The child's tiny body shivered uncontrollably, its skin a bluish tint from the freezing temperatures. The cry, once loud and desperate, had weakened to a faint whimper, each breath visible as a small cloud of steam in the bitter air. Shadow's heart pounded in his chest, the sound deafening in his own ears. He staggered forward, his legs wobbling beneath him, his body screaming for rest. But he couldn't stop. Not now. The baby's life depended on him. He approached cautiously, his nose flaring as he sniffed the blanket. The child's scent was faint, but Shadow could smell the fragility, the helplessness. The scent of abandonment lingered like an invisible weight in the air. He nudged the bundle gently with his nose, careful not to disturb it too suddenly. The moment he pushed aside the corner of the blanket, he froze. His instincts told him to run, to get away, but the sight before him rooted him to the spot. A human baby. A small, fragile thing no more than a few days old. Its tiny fists were balled tightly against the cold, its lips a dark purple from the exposure. The baby's cries had faded to near silence, its eyes squeezed shut, and it barely moved, each breath slower than the last. Shadow stood there for a long moment, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. There was no sign of a mother, no sign of anyone who could care for this child. The alley around them remained empty, the cold wind howling as if mocking the helplessness of them both. Shadow's body trembled with weakness, his stomach cramping with hunger, but he didn't care. He licked the baby's face instinctively, hoping his warmth might offer some comfort. The baby's skin was ice cold, harder than anything he had ever felt before. It was like touching stone. The realization hit him like a hammer. Without help, this child wouldn't survive the night. For a moment, Shadow thought of himself. Abandoned, alone, left to fight for survival in a world that had no use for him. But now, standing before this tiny human, he saw himself in a different light. This child, just like him, had been discarded. It had no place in the world, no protection, no warmth. Something shifted within him, a primal understanding that went beyond mere survival. The same instinct that had driven him to protect his family so many months ago flared up again. Shadow knew what he had to do. It wasn't about thinking. It wasn't about weighing options. It was about action, about doing whatever it took to save this life. He lowered his body to the ground, pressing his side against the baby's fragile form, sharing what little warmth he had left. The baby's weak cries became slightly stronger, a sign that the child was responding to his presence. For nearly an hour, Shadow lay there, his body curved protectively around the baby. But even he knew it wasn't enough. The cold would kill them both if they stayed here. Shadow shifted his weight, careful not to disturb the baby too much. His muscles screamed in protest, but he didn't care. He had to get the child somewhere safe, somewhere warm. He gently took the corner of the blanket in his teeth and, with surprising tenderness, pulled the baby closer, adjusting its position so it was securely wrapped. The moment was surreal. This once proud, strong German shepherd, now little more than a broken creature, carrying a helpless child through the streets. It was absurd, yet it was the only thing that made sense in the world. Shadow's legs trembled, and his vision blurred as he began to move, step by painful step, toward the unknown. He didn't know where he was going, but instinct was guiding him. Somewhere, someone had to help. Somewhere, there had to be a human with enough compassion to save this child. Just as he had been abandoned by humans, now he would find one who could offer a chance for both of them. The snow began to fall heavier, and the wind howled louder, but Shadow continued, his steps becoming slower with each passing minute. The baby no longer cried. It wasn't a good sign. Fear gripped Shadow's heart as he pressed on, the bundle swaying slightly with each step. His body screamed for rest, but his resolve was stronger than his exhaustion. He wasn't going to stop. Not now. Not until the child was safe. The snow had started to fall heavier now, blanketing the city in a soft, suffocating silence. Shadow's breath came in ragged gasps, his body trembling with the effort of carrying the tiny human in his mouth. His paws, raw and bloodied from months of hardship, left a trail of red against the fresh snow. The pain was almost unbearable, but the urge to protect, to save this fragile life, kept him moving forward. He didn't know where he was going, but some part of him, the part that had once been a loyal companion, a protector, knew he had to keep going. He followed the instincts that had guided him for years, even if it meant pushing his body beyond its limits. He limped through the snow, the weight of the baby hanging from the blanket like a heavy burden, but the child didn't cry. It didn't move, and that terrified Shadow. As he stumbled through the streets, his eyes darted from side to side, scanning for any signs of life. The city, usually bustling with energy, was eerily silent tonight. The storm had driven everyone indoors, leaving only the sound of the wind and the crunch of snow beneath his paws. Shadow's heart raced with anxiety. He needed to find someone, anyone who could help the baby. His legs were growing weaker by the minute, but he refused to stop. His ribs, exposed from months of starvation, ached with every breath, and his body felt like it was ready to give out at any moment. But he couldn't let that happen. Not when the baby was still alive. Not when it still had a chance. He reached a quiet residential street, lined with houses whose lights flickered through the falling snow. For a moment, Shadow hesitated. His instincts told him to keep moving, to find the warmth and safety the child needed. But the familiar glow of light in the windows, something he hadn't seen in so long, pulled him in. He limped forward, praying that someone inside might be kind enough to help. As he approached the first house, he noticed the shadows moving behind the curtain. There was someone inside. His heart skipped a beat, and a new surge of energy rushed through his tired body. He approached the window slowly, the weight of the baby still carefully cradled in his mouth. He placed his paw against the glass, his eyes locking onto the silhouette inside. The figure stopped, then turned, eyes widening in confusion as they saw the large dog standing on the other side of the window. Shadow barked, weak but urgent. The sound echoed in the silent night, breaking the stillness that had settled over the city. His body shook with the effort, but he couldn't stop. The baby needed help. The baby needed warmth. The bark was all he could give, and he hoped, prayed, that it would be enough. Inside, Maria Reyes had been staring blankly at her kitchen table, the weight of another long night settling over her. She hadn't slept in nearly 24 hours, not since the exhausting shift at the hospital. The loss of a patient, an elderly man who had reminded her too much of her own grandfather, had left her with a lingering heaviness in her chest. She had come home, made a cup of tea she never drank, and sat in the dark, trying to shake off the feeling of grief that clung to her like a shadow. Then the sound, a bark. It startled her, snapping her out of her haze. For a second, she thought she might have imagined it. But when she looked up, her eyes locked onto the window, where a large, emaciated dog was standing, its paw pressed against the glass. Shadow's dark eyes, filled with urgency and pain, met hers. He barked again, more insistently this time, and then, as if understanding the desperation in the moment, dropped the bundle in front of the window. Maria's heart stopped. Maria's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the bundle resting on the snow beneath the window. For a moment, everything around her seemed to slow down. The weight of the silence was oppressive, the sound of the snow falling against the window like a distant echo. The dog, its ribs showing through its matted fur, stood back, watching her with an intensity that she couldn't quite understand. His eyes were filled with something deeper than mere hunger, something primal, something protective. She stood frozen for a second, unsure of what to do. The urgency in the dog's eyes, the way it had nudged the bundle toward her, left no room for doubt. Something was wrong. With a quick breath, Maria stood up from her chair, her heart racing in her chest. She pulled open the window, leaning forward to get a better look. At first, she thought it was a doll, wrapped too tightly in a dirty blanket. But as she drew closer, she saw it. A baby. A tiny, fragile human being, no more than a few days old. Its skin was nearly blue from the cold, and its lips were pale, almost purple. The baby's small body shivered uncontrollably, its face twisted in the weak remnants of a cry that barely made it past its lips. The blanket was thin, soaked through with snow and dirt. This wasn't just an abandoned child. It was a life hanging on by the thinnest of threads. Maria's chest tightened with panic as she quickly opened the door. Without thinking, she rushed outside, her eyes locked on the baby as she knelt beside it. Her heart was pounding in her ears, a rush of adrenaline flooding her body. The dog watched her every move, his eyes never leaving her as she carefully picked up the bundle. His silent presence was oddly reassuring. She could feel the warmth of his breath behind her as she cradled the baby in her arms, desperate to provide some comfort, some warmth to the lifeless form. The moment Maria's hands touched the baby's skin, she felt the icy chill of death on it. She gasped, the reality of the situation crashing over her. This child shouldn't have been here. She shouldn't have been left alone in the freezing cold, abandoned without a chance for survival. The baby's breaths were shallow, each one weaker than the last. Maria's hands trembled as she adjusted the blanket, pulling it tighter around the child in a futile attempt to offer warmth. "Come on," Maria whispered, almost to herself. "Stay with me." The dog remained still, his eyes focused on the baby, his body tense as if waiting for her to do something. It was as if he knew that Maria was the one who could help. The dog had found the child, brought it to her, and now it was up to her to save its life. The weight of the responsibility settled in Maria's chest, but she refused to let the fear take over. She couldn't. Not now. Not when this child was depending on her. She stood up quickly, clutching the baby close to her chest. The dog followed her movements, his body moving with an unsettling grace for one so clearly weakened by hunger and exhaustion. As she made her way back inside, she glanced back at the dog, who was limping behind her, his eyes never leaving her or the baby. For the first time in a long while, Maria wasn't alone. And in the strangest way, she realized the dog wasn't either. Once inside, Maria rushed to the kitchen and grabbed a towel to wrap the baby in. She moved quickly, her hands shaking as she tried to warm the child up, but the baby's body was still so cold, so lifeless. Maria felt a pang of fear deep in her stomach. What if it was too late? What if the child didn't make it? The dog stood in the doorway, watching her intently. His gaze shifted from the baby to her, a silent plea in his eyes. It was as if he understood the fragility of life, the preciousness of the moment. Maria glanced at him, her heart aching. She didn't know who this dog was or how he had ended up on her doorstep, but she knew one thing for sure. He had saved this child's life. As the baby stirred slightly in her arms, Maria's breath hitched with hope. A small sign. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep her going. She gently rocked the baby, murmuring soothing words, though she wasn't sure if they would help. The baby's breaths grew steadier, though still faint. It was something. It was hope. Meanwhile, Shadow remained by the door, watching closely. His body was spent, his energy depleted, but there was something in his gaze that was unmistakable. A determination that burned brighter than the weakness in his bones. He had done his part. Now he needed Maria to do hers. Maria's hands were trembling as she paced back and forth across the kitchen, cradling the tiny bundle in her arms. The baby, wrapped in the dirty blanket she had found it in, was still so cold to the touch. Her breath was shallow, her lips almost a pale shade of purple, and every movement seemed to take more effort than the last. Maria could feel her heart race with worry. What if it was too late? What if the baby had been exposed to the cold for too long? Her mind spun with questions she didn't have the answers to. The dog, Shadow as she had started calling him, was still there, standing by the doorway, his eyes fixed on the baby with an unwavering intensity. He had brought her to Maria, and now, as if his job was done, he seemed to be waiting for her to take the next step. Maria wasn't sure if it was the exhaustion from the night, the fear of what was happening, or something deeper that made her feel so connected to this strange animal. But there was something in his gaze, a quiet urgency, that told her he wasn't going anywhere. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the background, each second feeling like an eternity. The baby let out another faint whimper, a small sound that nearly broke Maria's heart. She rushed to the stove, turning it on to warm some water, her movements fast and frantic. She needed to do something, anything, that would bring this baby back from the brink. As she ran a towel under the warm water, she glanced over at Shadow, still standing motionless, as though he too was waiting for her to do something, anything, to make sure the child would survive. Maria quickly folded the towel and wrapped it around the baby, trying her best to keep it from shaking too much. Her fingers were cold and stiff, but she continued working quickly, trying to warm the child the best she could. She glanced at the dog again, her mind racing. She needed to call someone. Someone who could help, someone who could take care of the baby properly. She had no idea what she was doing, but something inside her told her she had to keep trying, for the baby's sake. She reached for her phone on the counter, her hands still trembling as she dialed the emergency number. The line rang several times before a voice picked up. 911, what's your emergency? I found an abandoned baby, Maria said, her voice cracking as she spoke. She's cold, she's barely breathing. I don't know what to do. The operator's voice came back, calm and reassuring. Stay calm, ma'am. Help is on the way. Can you tell me where you are? Maria gave the address, trying to keep her voice steady. Please hurry, she added, the words slipping out before she could stop herself. As she hung up the phone, she looked at the baby in her arms once more. The child was still cold, but the faintest hint of warmth was starting to return to its small body. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give Maria a flicker of hope. She wasn't sure how long it would take for the paramedics to arrive, but it didn't matter. She would do everything she could to keep the baby alive until then. Meanwhile, Shadow remained by the door, his presence both comforting and unsettling. Maria could feel the weight of his gaze on her. He was still standing there, waiting, watching over them both. There was a quiet strength in his stillness that made Maria feel like she wasn't alone in this. It was as if, in some strange way, he was a part of the plan, too. She knelt beside him, her eyes meeting his. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You saved her. You saved us." The dog's tail flicked slightly at the sound of her voice, but he remained as still as ever. Maria stood up, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude wash over her. Without Shadow, this baby would have been left alone in the cold, without a chance. He had brought the child to her, and now it was up to her to make sure they both survived the night. The sound of sirens in the distance grew louder, signaling that help was on its way. But Maria didn't feel entirely relieved. The road ahead was still uncertain, and the danger was far from over. The baby was still in critical condition, and Shadow, though a hero, was not out of danger either. His body was weak, his ribs visible under his fur, and his breathing labored from the effort it had taken to carry the child through the streets. Maria knew she couldn't ignore his condition any longer. The sound of sirens grew louder, but in the quiet of the house, it felt like the world had frozen around Maria. As she continued to warm the baby with the towel, the minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Her hands, still trembling from the shock of everything that had happened, were growing warmer now, but the baby's skin remained cold to the touch. Maria's stomach twisted with fear. What if it was too late? What if there wasn't enough time? She turned back to Shadow, who had not moved from his spot near the door. His eyes were fixed on her, but his body sagged with exhaustion. Despite the fragility of his own condition, the dog's silent vigilance remained unwavering. Maria couldn't shake the sense that Shadow had been more than just a bystander in this rescue. He had been the one who had found the baby, brought it to her, and now, in his own quiet way, was helping her fight for its life. The sirens finally stopped outside, and a few moments later, the doorbell rang. Maria rushed to the door, her heart pounding. As she opened it, the sight of two paramedics standing outside with their equipment filled her with a mixture of relief and anxiety. They didn't waste any time. They were here for the baby, and that's all that mattered. "Ma'am, we're here to help," one of the paramedics said as he quickly stepped inside, followed by his partner. Maria moved aside, stepping back to allow them to reach the baby. "Please," she said. "She's been outside for too long. She was abandoned in the cold. I don't know if she's going to make it." Her voice trembled as she spoke the words aloud, the reality of the situation hitting her all over again. The paramedics immediately set to work, checking the baby's vitals, their faces serious. One of them carefully took the baby from Maria's arms, wrapping her in a heated blanket. "She's alive, but she's dangerously hypothermic. We need to get her to the hospital immediately," he said, glancing over at his partner. "Get the equipment ready." Maria nodded, trying to hold it together. She watched as the paramedics worked, her mind still reeling from the night's events. The weight of the situation pressed down on her. This was not how she had expected her night to unfold. She had been prepared for silence and grief after a long shift at the hospital. She hadn't expected to become the rescuer, the one who would fight for this tiny life. "Will she be okay?" Maria asked, her voice tight with concern. The paramedic hesitated for just a moment. "It's too early to say. We've got her stabilized for now, but she'll need a full assessment at the hospital. She's in critical condition, but we're doing everything we can. Maria's eyes followed the paramedics as they moved swiftly toward the door, baby in tow. They stopped at the threshold, looking back at her. "Ma'am, we're going to take good care of her," one of the paramedics said, giving her a reassuring smile. "Do you want to come with us?" Maria hesitated. A part of her wanted to go with them to make sure the baby would be okay. But another part of her knew that she couldn't leave Shadow. Not yet. The dog had been there, had brought the child to her. She couldn't just turn her back on him now. "No, I'll stay here," she said softly. "I'll wait. Please, make sure she's okay." The paramedics nodded and left, taking the baby with them. Maria stood in the doorway for a moment, watching as the ambulance pulled away into the night. The weight of everything was starting to settle in, and a deep sense of gratitude washed over her. She had saved the baby's life, but it had been Shadow who had made that possible. She turned back to find the dog still standing in the same spot, his head lowered now, as if the weight of everything that had happened was finally catching up to him. His body was weak, trembling with exhaustion, but his eyes were still alert, his gaze still focused on her. Maria stepped forward slowly, crouching down next to him. "You did it," she whispered, her voice full of emotion. "You saved her. You saved us." Shadow's tail flicked weakly, a small acknowledgement of her words, but he didn't move. He was spent, his body having given everything it had in that one desperate act of bravery. Maria gently stroked his fur, feeling the roughness of it beneath her fingers. "You need help too," she murmured, looking at the bloodied paws, the thinness of his body. "You're not okay either." With trembling hands, Maria reached for her phone and dialed the number for the nearest veterinary clinic. Shadow was still standing, but the exhaustion was taking its toll. She could see it in his eyes, the flickering of consciousness, the fading strength. She wasn't sure how much longer he could stay awake, and she knew he needed care as much as the baby did. The call was answered almost immediately. "Emergency veterinary clinic. How can we help you?" "I have a dog here," Maria said, her voice tight. "He's badly hurt. He's been on the streets for months, I think, and he just saved an abandoned baby. He's in bad shape. Please, I need help." The receptionist on the other end responded quickly. "Don't worry, ma'am. Bring him in right away. We're ready." Maria stood, taking a deep breath. Shadow needed help. He had already done more than anyone could have asked of him, and now it was her turn to save him. Maria sat in the quiet of her living room, the empty space around her feeling louder than it ever had before. The baby was gone, taken by the paramedics to the hospital, and Shadow, though still weak, had been carefully transported to the veterinary clinic for treatment. The silence was almost suffocating. She hadn't expected her night to unfold this way. A quiet evening after a long shift, a cup of tea she hadn't drunk, a few moments of peace. But fate had other plans. Now there was a child, no more than a few days old, fighting for its life in a hospital room, and a dog who had gone from a stray wandering the streets to a hero, a savior of a life that might have otherwise been lost. Her phone buzzed in her lap, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a text message from the vet clinic. "Shadow has been stabilized for now. He's severely malnourished, and we'll need to monitor him closely. He'll need a lot of care, but we're doing everything we can." Maria read the message twice, letting the words sink in. Shadow wasn't out of danger yet. He had saved the baby, but now he needed saving too. She had expected it. The dog was in no condition to be on the streets for so long, but the reality of his state hit her hard. He had given everything for this child. Now it was her turn to give everything to him. A part of her wanted to go to the clinic right away to make sure Shadow was okay. But she knew she couldn't. The baby was still in critical condition, and she needed to stay focused on the little life that had been left at her doorstep. Shadow had done his part. Now it was time for her to do hers. She stood up and walked over to the window, her gaze falling on the empty street outside. The world beyond her home seemed distant, untouched by the chaos that had entered her life just hours ago. The snow was still falling, but it felt different now, softer somehow, like the world was holding its breath along with her. Everything had changed. She glanced back at the living room, at the empty space where the baby had been for only a brief moment. A deep pang of longing and fear twisted inside her. Would the baby make it through the night? Was it too late to save her? Maria didn't have the answers, but she couldn't afford to dwell on them. She needed to be strong, for both the baby and for Shadow. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her from her thoughts. It was another message, this time from the hospital. Baby is stable for now. We'll update you with any changes. The words were a slight comfort, but not enough to soothe the unease in her heart. There was still so much that could go wrong. Maria's mind was racing, filled with questions she didn't have answers to. But one thing was clear. She had to keep moving forward. She gathered her coat and scarf, ready to leave for the hospital. The baby needed her, and Shadow needed her too. But as she stood by the door, ready to step into the night, a sudden thought hit her like a lightning bolt. What if she couldn't help both of them? What if it was too much for her to handle? The fear of failing both the baby and the dog made her pause for a long moment. But then she remembered what Shadow had done. He had kept moving, even when his body was breaking down, even when every step was a struggle. He had fought for this child. He had brought it to her. And now Maria couldn't stop. She couldn't give up, not when the baby and the dog both needed her. She pushed the thought aside and stepped out the door, the cold air biting her skin as she walked down the street. The world felt quieter now, as though the city itself was holding its breath for the outcome of this night. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know if the baby would survive or if Shadow would make it through the night. But she did know one thing. She couldn't do it alone. The world may have abandoned them both, but together, they had a chance. Maria walked down the quiet street, her breath coming out in visible clouds, the cold biting at her face and hands. Each step seemed to take her farther from the comfort of her home, but closer to the hospital where the baby was being treated. It wasn't just the cold that made her shiver. It was the weight of everything that had happened, and everything that could happen next. She reached the hospital just as the first rays of dawn began to creep over the horizon, casting pale light through the snow-covered streets. The emergency room doors whooshed open as she stepped inside, greeted by the warmth and sterile scent of the hospital. The chaos of the night had given way to the quiet hum of medical equipment and soft voices of nurses moving about their work. Maria didn't stop to think about what was next. She just followed the signs to the neonatal unit, her mind focused on one thing: the baby. When she arrived at the NICU, she was directed to a small room where she could wait for an update. The nurse who had been with the baby all night gave her a quick smile, but there was a tension in her eyes that Maria couldn't ignore. "Ms. Reyes," the nurse began, "the baby's vitals are stabilizing, but she's still very fragile. We've got her under a warming lamp, and she's responding to treatment. But we need to keep monitoring her closely. She's not out of the woods yet." Maria nodded, trying to swallow the lump in her throat. "Thank you. Thank you for everything you've done." The nurse gave her a small nod, then left the room, leaving Maria alone with her thoughts. The words "not out of the woods yet" rang in her ears, echoing the fear that had taken root in her chest when she first found the baby. The baby was alive, but the battle wasn't over. Maria sat down, her mind racing with the image of the little girl, so fragile and alone, and the dog who had brought her to safety. She could feel her heart breaking all over again. It had been a cruel twist of fate, the baby abandoned in the freezing cold by someone who should have cared for her, just like Shadow had been abandoned by the family he had once loved. And yet, in that moment of desperation, they had both found each other. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more at play here, a connection between Shadow, the baby, and herself that went beyond mere coincidence. But she didn't have time to dwell on that now. The baby needed her. As the minutes ticked by, Maria's thoughts turned to Shadow again. He had given everything to save the baby, and now he was at the clinic, in desperate need of care himself. She had promised him that she wouldn't leave him behind, and she intended to keep that promise. But she knew it wouldn't be easy. His recovery would take time, both physical and emotional. After months of surviving alone on the streets, Shadow had earned the right to a chance at life. She would give it to him just as he had given the baby a chance. Maria stood up, her resolve strengthening. She had done what she could for the baby, but she still had one more thing to do. She had to get back to the clinic to make sure Shadow was okay, to make sure he knew that he wasn't alone anymore. She left the NICU and hurried toward the clinic, her footsteps quick and purposeful. As she walked, her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a message from the veterinary clinic. Shadow is stable for now, but he's not out of the woods either. We're doing everything we can, but we need to keep him under close observation. He's very weak, but his spirit is strong. Maria felt a sigh of relief escape her, though it was tempered with the harsh reality of how fragile Shadow was. He had been through so much already, and now he was relying on her for survival. By the time she reached the clinic, the sun had fully risen, casting soft light over the city. She pushed through the clinic doors, the familiar smell of antiseptic greeting her. The receptionist recognized her immediately, giving her a quick nod. "I'm here for Shadow," Maria said, her voice calm but urgent. "How is he?" The receptionist smiled sympathetically. "He's hanging in there. Dr. Patel is finishing up his examination. Why don't you head on back? She'll fill you in." Maria made her way to the back, her heart beating faster with every step. She found Dr. Patel in a small exam room, sitting beside Shadow, who lay on a soft bed, still weak but alert. His dark eyes met hers the moment she entered, and despite the exhaustion in his body, there was something in his gaze that made Maria's heart swell. "You're okay," Maria whispered, kneeling beside him. Shadow's tail thumped weakly against the bed in response, but he didn't move much otherwise. His ribs still showed beneath his fur, and his breathing was shallow, but he was alive. He was here. Dr. Patel looked up from her notes, her expression kind but professional. "He's stable for now. The good news is that his vitals are improving. He's been through a lot, but he's a fighter. We're going to keep him here for a while to make sure he's fully stabilized." Maria nodded, relieved but still worried. "Thank you, Dr. Patel. I don't know what to say. He saved that baby's life. I'm just so grateful." Dr. Patel smiled softly. "You don't need to say anything. It's clear that Shadow has a lot of fight left in him. And now, it's your turn to help him heal." Maria reached out, gently running her fingers through Shadow's fur. He closed his eyes in response, his body still trembling slightly but comforted by her touch. She wasn't sure how much time they had, how long it would take for Shadow to fully recover, but she knew one thing for sure. She would be here, with him, every step of the way. Just as he had done for the baby, she would do for him. As she stood, a quiet determination filled her. It wasn't just the baby who needed her. It was Shadow too, and together they would heal. The days that followed felt like a blur to Maria. Between the hospital visits, caring for the baby, and making sure Shadow was recovering at the clinic, her life had become a series of routines, one after another, always with a sense of urgency in her every step. It was as if the world had been on pause, and she was suddenly thrust into a new, chaotic reality. A reality where two lives, both fragile, both fighting to survive, depended on her in ways she had never imagined. The baby, whose name Maria had learned was Sophia, was slowly improving. The doctors had said she was a miracle. Her survival after being abandoned in the freezing cold, in such a vulnerable state, was nothing short of astonishing. But still, they warned her to be cautious. There were things they couldn't predict, conditions they couldn't guarantee would heal. Maria had stayed with her every day, watching as Sophia's tiny body gained strength, her breathing becoming more steady, her color slowly returning to her skin. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep Maria hopeful. Shadow, too, was making progress. He wasn't out of danger yet, but every time Maria saw him, she noticed small improvements. His tail thumped more eagerly when she walked into the room, his eyes a little clearer, his strength slowly returning. The first time he stood up on his own after days of lying still, Maria nearly cried with relief. He was a fighter just like the baby, but he was also still fragile, his body worn down from months of neglect. his wounds healing slowly. Maria visited Shadow every day, staying with him until the clinic staff gently encouraged her to go home for a while. They knew he needed her, but they also knew that his recovery would take time. The love and care she provided, just being there, were crucial, but they couldn't rush the healing process. He needed rest, and so did she. But each night, as she sat in her apartment alone, Maria couldn't help but feel a gnawing unease. There was still so much she didn't know. About the baby's past, about Shadow's. The more time passed, the more she realized that the answers she sought were buried in a story she hadn't yet uncovered. Sophia had been left to die in an alley, abandoned by someone. But who? And why? Who was the mother? What had happened that night? Maria thought of the quiet moments she had shared with Shadow, the way he had looked at her with such intensity when she spoke to him, as if he understood every word. The bond between them was undeniable, and Maria had no doubt that he had saved Sophia's life. But there were still unanswered questions about his past, his life before he had come to her. Who had left him to fend for himself on the streets? Why had he been abandoned? Maria had started asking around at the clinic, but no one seemed to know much about him. She had called a few local shelters, trying to find any records of him being brought in. But so far, nothing had turned up. Shadow's story, like Sophia's, seemed to be one of abandonment. Lost pieces of a broken past that she had yet to understand. On the 5th day after the rescue, Maria received a phone call that would change everything. It was from Detective James Morales, the officer who had been assigned to investigate the case of the abandoned baby. His voice was steady, but there was a note of urgency in it that immediately caught her attention. "Ms. Reyes, I need to speak with you about the baby," he said, his tone cautious but firm. "And about the dog, Shadow." Maria's heart skipped a beat. She had been expecting updates on both Sophia and Shadow, but something in the detective's voice made her stomach tighten with worry. "I've been looking into the case," Detective Morales continued, "and I need your help with something. We've made some progress, but we're hitting a wall. We need to know what happened before that baby was abandoned." Maria's mind raced. "What do you mean?" she asked. "What happened? Is Sophia okay?" "She's improving, yes," the detective reassured her. "But there's something else. We've found some leads, but there's a lot we don't know. I need to ask you a few questions, if that's okay." Maria agreed, her voice steady but her mind clouded with uncertainty. She wasn't prepared for what the detective was about to reveal, and she couldn't shake the feeling that whatever came next would shift everything she thought she knew about the night Shadow had found the baby. Maria sat in the small room at the clinic, the phone pressed against her ear, as Detective Morales continued speaking. Her thoughts were racing, her stomach tight with worry. "I need to ask about the baby's mother," the detective said, his voice steady but laced with concern. "We've been trying to track her down, but we haven't had much luck. We did, however, find something interesting. Your dog Shadow, he wasn't just a stray. We believe he's been living near the area where the baby was found for some time." Maria's heart skipped a beat. Shadow had been living in the streets, but she never imagined he might have been near the baby's location before. Could it be possible? Had he been watching over her from the shadows even before the fateful night when he found her? The thought left her with a strange mix of wonder and unease. "Detective?" Maria asked, her voice shaking slightly. "What do you mean by that? Are you suggesting Shadow has been there before?" The detective paused for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. "We think Shadow has a connection to the area. The location of the alley where the baby was abandoned matches a few places where he's been seen in the past. It seems strange that he would have just stumbled across her that night. There's a chance he had been watching over her for a while, maybe even protecting her." Maria felt a chill run down her spine. She had always felt a strange bond with Shadow, an inexplicable sense that they were connected in some way. But hearing this, it was as if the universe had been pulling them together all along, weaving their fates in ways she couldn't comprehend. "Do you think he knew her?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We can't say for sure, but we're looking into it," Detective Morales replied. "I'm also trying to find out more about the baby's mother. I'll need your help with some information we've gathered." We believe we're getting closer to understanding why this happened, but we're hitting dead ends with her." Maria's heart clenched. The baby had been abandoned in such a brutal way. Her mind swirled with questions. Why would someone do this? Who could leave an infant to die in the cold, exposed to the harsh elements? She felt a wave of anger rise within her, but tried to push it down. She had to stay focused. The detective was trying to uncover the truth, and she couldn't let her emotions cloud the process. "What do you need from me?" she asked, trying to keep her voice calm. "There's something we discovered when we checked local records," Detective Morales continued. "The mother's name is Lucia Mendez. She's been hospitalized recently, and we're trying to piece together the timeline. She has a history of mental health struggles, and we believe she may have been in a fragile state when the baby was born. I need you to think back, Ms. Reyes. Do you remember anything unusual about the baby's condition? Anything that might suggest a connection to this woman?" Maria thought hard. She hadn't noticed anything at first when she found the baby. Just the cold, the stillness, the weakness. But the more she thought about it, the more questions arose. She remembered the way the baby had felt in her arms, as if she had been cared for in the days before being abandoned. The baby wasn't severely malnourished, and her umbilical cord had been properly cut, as if someone had taken care in preparing her for something. Could it be possible that Lucia had been the one to care for her before abandoning her? "I didn't see anything that stood out at the time," Maria said. "But now that you mention it, the baby didn't look like someone who had just been left alone. She seemed, I don't know, almost like she'd been taken care of for a short time before being left in the alley. She wasn't underweight or dirty. There was a care to her that I didn't understand at first." "That's exactly what we're seeing," the detective replied. "It's too soon to jump to conclusions, but we're starting to believe that Lucia may have been trying to protect the baby, at least for a short time before the abandonment. She might have thought the dog could help her." Maria's mind reeled as she processed this information. Could the mother have left her baby in the alley, knowing Shadow would find her? It seemed almost impossible, yet the pieces were beginning to fit together. Shadow wasn't just some stray dog. He was a guardian, a protector in ways Maria had never imagined. "What happened to Lucia?" Maria asked, her voice trembling with concern. "Where is she now?" "We've located her," the detective said. "She's currently in the hospital, recovering from complications after giving birth. But we've also learned that she's been under a lot of stress, dealing with some difficult personal circumstances. I'm going to meet with her soon, and I'll update you as soon as we know more." Maria hung up the phone with a heavy heart. The truth was beginning to emerge, but the pieces still didn't make sense. What had driven a mother to abandon her child in the cold? What kind of desperation had led Lucia to place her baby in the hands of a stray dog, trusting that he would save her? She felt the weight of the responsibility that had been placed on her growing heavier. Not only was she caring for the baby now, but Shadow, too, had come into her life in a way she couldn't ignore. He was connected to this mystery, perhaps more deeply than she had realized. He had been a part of Sophia's life before she even knew her, and now he was a part of her family. Maria looked over at Shadow, who was lying quietly on his bed at the clinic, still recovering but steadily gaining strength. He had already given so much. Now it was her turn to help him. But it wasn't just about Shadow anymore. It was about the child he had saved, the mother who had been lost in her own struggles, and the bond that had formed between them all. As Maria stood and made her way to the clinic to check on Shadow, she knew one thing. This was only the beginning. The journey ahead would be long and filled with uncertainty, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like she wasn't facing it alone. The sun was barely visible on the horizon when Maria arrived at the veterinary clinic. She had barely slept the night before, the weight of everything pressing down on her chest, leaving her restless. Shadow had been stable, but his recovery was slow. Every day, she saw small improvements. His eyes brighter, his tail wagging a little more, his body slowly regaining strength. But there was still a long road ahead, and she couldn't ignore the nagging thought at the back of her mind. What happened to him before he became a stray? What had led him to wander the streets? And how had he become the unlikely hero that saved Sophia? Maria walked through the clinic's door, her heart heavy with the questions she didn't have answers to. The air was thick with the sterile smell of disinfectant, and the quiet hum of the clinic seemed almost too loud in the early morning hours. The receptionist greeted her with a tired smile, but Maria could see the exhaustion in her eyes. It was a small clinic, and the staff was always stretched thin, especially with animals like Shadow, those who had been through hell and back, struggling to heal both physically and emotionally. "Morning, Ms. Reyes. Shadow's in the back. Dr. Patel is just finishing up with him. You can go on in," the receptionist said, motioning toward the hallway. Maria nodded, offering a soft thanks before making her way to the back. The familiar scent of animal care grew stronger as she moved down the hallway, and she felt a sense of calm settle over her. Shadow was here, safe for now, and that was all that mattered. But as she reached the door to his recovery room, her thoughts turned back to the baby. Sophia was still at the hospital, improving slowly but steadily. The doctors had told her that it was a miracle the child had survived the cold, but there were still concerns about the long-term effects of her abandonment. Sophia had been underweight when she was found, her body not only cold but weak from the trauma. Maria had sat with her for hours every day, comforting the tiny baby, holding her, praying for her strength to return. But just as much as she wanted to help Sophia, she couldn't stop thinking about the connection between the baby and Shadow. They had both been abandoned, left alone in the cold, with no one to care for them. But somehow, they had found each other, and now they were both in her care. The door creaked open, and Maria stepped inside. Shadow was lying on the bed, his body still fragile but calmer now. His breathing was steady, and for the first time in days, his eyes were focused and alert. When he saw her, his tail thumped weakly against the blanket, a small but meaningful gesture. Maria smiled and knelt beside him, her heart swelling with a mixture of affection and gratitude. "Hey, Shadow," she whispered, gently running her hand over his head. "How are you feeling today?" Shadow's gaze softened as he met her eyes, and for a moment, it felt as though there were no words needed. His presence, the bond between them, was enough. Maria could feel the deep connection they shared, one that went beyond the physical, one that transcended their circumstances. He had saved Sophia. He had saved them both. Dr. Patel entered the room, a warm smile on her face. "He's doing much better. He's still weak, but his vitals are improving, and he's responding to the treatment. I'm hopeful that, with time, he'll regain his full strength. But it's important to remember that his body has been through a lot. He's not going to bounce back overnight." Maria nodded, absorbing the information. She'd expected as much, but hearing it from Dr. Patel made it feel more real. Shadow was going to be okay, but it wasn't going to be easy. His body had endured so much, and now it was time for him to heal, to find his way back to the strength he once had. "Thank you, Dr. Patel," Maria said quietly, her eyes never leaving Shadow. She could see the weariness in the doctor's eyes, but there was also something else, a quiet admiration. She knew that Dr. Patel had seen countless cases of animal suffering, but something about Shadow's journey seemed to touch her on a deeper level. Dr. Patel paused before leaving, her voice soft but serious. "Ms. Reyes, I've been meaning to ask you, do you know anything about his past? Where he came from? How he ended up on the streets?" Maria shook her head slowly. "I don't know. I don't think anyone knows. He was a stray when I found him, and the shelters have no record of him. He didn't have a collar or any identification. He was just lost. And then he saved the baby." Dr. Patel sighed, as if processing the information. "I've been asking around here, trying to find out more, and I came across something that might be worth looking into. There's a chance Shadow could have been part of a family at some point. A family who may have moved away or abandoned him. The way he's behaved with the baby, the way he's acted around you, it suggests he had a home once. I know it's a long shot, but if there's any chance of tracking down his past, it might give us more answers, both for him and for the baby." Maria's heart skipped a beat. Was it possible? Could Shadow have been part of a family, once loved and cared for, before being discarded like so many other strays? She had always felt that Shadow was different, that he wasn't just another animal on the streets. But this This was a new piece of the puzzle she hadn't considered. Maria sat silently for a moment, her mind racing with possibilities. Could Shadow have had a family once? Could he have been loved, cared for, before he was left to fend for himself? The idea that he had once been part of a home, a place where he was wanted and cared for, made the depth of his suffering even harder to comprehend. It also gave her a renewed sense of urgency. If there was a chance to uncover his past, to find the family who had abandoned him, she had to pursue it, for Shadow and for herself. Dr. Patel, how do we even start looking into this? Maria asked, her voice low, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile hope that had begun to bloom within her. Dr. Patel gave her a thoughtful look. We can start by reaching out to the local shelters, animal control services, and even nearby veterinarians. If he was part of a family, it's possible someone might have contacted a clinic for his vaccinations or treatment at some point. But we might also have to ask around in the community, find people who may have seen him, who might know something about where he came from. Could take some time. Maria nodded, taking in the information. The idea of digging into Shadow's past felt overwhelming, but it was something she had to do. For Shadow, for the baby, and for her own peace of mind. If she could piece together the mystery of what happened to him before, maybe she would finally understand why he had been so determined to save Sophia, to bring her to safety despite the condition he was in. Thank you, Dr. Patel, Maria said, her voice filled with gratitude. I'll start reaching out to the shelters and the clinics. I want to give him a chance. He deserves to know that he's not alone anymore. Dr. Patel gave her a warm smile. I believe he already knows that, Ms. Reyes. I think he's found his place with you. Maria smiled softly, her eyes returning to Shadow. He was lying on his side, his head resting gently on the bed, his breathing steady, though still shallow. He had come so far, but there was still so much left to do. She had to find out about his past, but she also needed to focus on his healing. The wounds he had carried for so long, both physical and emotional, couldn't be healed overnight. But with time, with love, and with patience, she knew that Shadow would recover. She stood up and walked over to him, her heart swelling with affection. I'm not going to give up on you, Shadow. I won't let you down. His ears flicked, and he raised his head slightly, meeting her gaze. A faint, almost imperceptible wag of his tail was all the response she needed. It was as if he understood everything she was saying, as if the bond they shared went beyond words, beyond any of the barriers that might have existed between them. They had saved each other, in ways neither of them fully understood yet. But in this moment, in the quiet of the clinic, Maria knew that they were exactly where they were supposed to be. She spent the rest of the morning with Shadow, sitting beside him, offering him comfort and affection. The clinic staff came in and out, checking on him and making sure he was stable, but they knew she wasn't ready to leave him just yet. After all, this wasn't just a dog. Shadow was more than that. He was a symbol of resilience, of strength, and of the unexpected bonds that can form in the most unlikely of circumstances. At some point, Dr. Patel came back into the room to check on Shadow's condition. Maria stood up as she entered, her expression serious. I've been thinking, Maria began. What if Shadow's story isn't just about him? What if it's connected to the baby somehow? Dr. Patel raised an eyebrow. You mean you think there's more to their connection than just the rescue? Maria nodded. Yes, I don't know how or why, but I feel like there's something more here. The way he protected her, brought her to me. It's like he knew her. He knew she needed help. There has to be a reason for that. Dr. Patel looked thoughtful. It's possible. Animals have incredible instincts, Maria. But sometimes we can't explain why they do what they do. Maybe it's not about understanding the why, but the fact that it happened. They were meant to find each other. And now they've both found you. Maria smiled at the doctor's words, feeling a sense of peace settle over her. Shadow and Sophia had crossed paths for a reason. And now they were her responsibility. She would take care of them both, no matter what it took. Later that afternoon, Maria left the clinic and headed to the local shelters. The thought of finding out more about Shadow's past filled her with both excitement and dread. Would the shelters know anything? Would anyone have seen him? The unknowns loomed over her, but she had to try. She couldn't let Shadow's past remain a mystery forever. He deserved the truth just as much as the baby did. As she made her way from one shelter to the next, her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a text from the hospital. Sophia is stable. We're optimistic, but we're keeping her under observation for a while longer. We'll update you again soon. Maria felt a wave of relief wash over her as she read the message. Sophia was okay. She was going to be okay. But Maria knew the journey was far from over. There were still pieces to find, questions to answer, and a family to heal. And in the midst of it all, Shadow had become a part of that healing process. His own recovery intertwined with theirs. Together, they would face whatever came next. Maria had spent the last few days running from shelter to shelter, from clinic to clinic, trying to track down any shred of information about Shadow's past. Each lead she followed turned into a dead end. No one had any record of him. No one had seen him before the night he found the baby. It was as if he had appeared out of nowhere, and Maria was starting to feel like she was chasing a ghost. But she couldn't stop. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to Shadow's story. The bond between them, the way he had saved the baby, the way he seemed to understand everything. It all pointed to a deeper connection, something hidden just beneath the surface. She had just finished visiting the last shelter on her list when her phone buzzed. Maria pulled it from her pocket, and the message on the screen made her heart skip a beat. It was from Dr. Patel. Shadow is asking for you. His recovery is going well, but he seems agitated. Can you come by? Maria didn't waste a second. She immediately jumped into her car and sped toward the clinic. Something in Dr. Patel's message felt urgent, like Shadow needed her more than ever, and she wasn't going to let him down now. The clinic was quieter than usual when she arrived, the usual hum of voices and busy staff replaced by a calm stillness. As she walked down the familiar hallway toward Shadow's recovery room, her heart raced. What could have happened? Why would Shadow be agitated now, after all the progress he had made? When she reached the door, she hesitated for a moment, then pushed it open. Shadow was lying on his bed, his body still weak, but his eyes were wide open, alert in a way Maria hadn't seen before. He lifted his head as soon as she stepped inside, and his gaze locked onto hers with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. His tail thumped weakly against the bed, but his body was tense, his muscles coiled as if ready to spring into action. "Hey, buddy," Maria said softly, walking toward him. "What's going on? Why are you so worked up?" Shadow's eyes never left hers, and for a moment, Maria swore she saw something flicker in them. It was as if he was trying to tell her something important. But how could she understand him? How could she know what he was trying to say? Dr. Patel appeared in the doorway, her face creased with concern. "I've never seen him like this," she admitted. "He's been calm for the past few days, but today, he seems almost restless, like he's waiting for something." Maria knelt down beside the bed, reaching out a hand to gently stroke Shadow's fur. "It's okay, Shadow. I'm here. You don't have to worry." But Shadow didn't relax. If anything, his body seemed to tense even further, his eyes now darting toward the door, then back to Maria, as if he was trying to communicate something that was just out of reach. Maria could feel the anxiety radiating off of him, and it made her stomach tighten with worry. What was wrong? Why wasn't he calming down? Dr. Patel moved closer, her expression thoughtful. "I wonder if... could it be possible that he's reacting to something outside of here? Maybe he senses something, someone. It's strange, but animals have an uncanny way of knowing things we can't explain." Maria's mind raced. Could Shadow be picking up on something? Could he sense something she couldn't? And if so, what did it mean? She had felt the pull of something more from the beginning, the way their paths had crossed, the way he had found her, and the baby. It was almost as if the universe had conspired to bring them together. But now, as she looked into Shadow's eyes, she felt a sudden sense of urgency. Something was coming, something they weren't ready for. Before she could voice her thoughts, the door to the clinic opened with a soft creak. Maria's head snapped around. her heart leaping into her throat. She hadn't heard anyone coming, but there was a figure standing in the doorway, tall, shadowed, and unmistakably familiar. The figure stepped forward into the light. It was Lucia. Maria's breath caught in her chest. For a moment, she could barely process what was happening. Lucia, the baby's mother, the woman who had been absent from the investigation until now, was standing right in front of her. Maria's mind raced. What was Lucia doing here? How had she found them? Lucia's eyes were wide, and she looked as though she hadn't slept in days. There were dark circles under her eyes, and her clothes were disheveled, as if she had been wandering for hours. She seemed lost, as if she didn't know where she was or what to do. Her face was a mask of worry, guilt, and confusion. Shadow, still tense, looked up at her, and for the first time since Maria had entered the room, he relaxed. His body seemed to soften, and his tail gave a weak thump against the bed. Maria watched in awe as the dog, who had been so agitated just moments ago, calmed completely at the sight of Lucia. Lucia took a hesitant step forward, her voice barely a whisper. Is she okay? The baby, Sophia? Maria stared at her, shocked. You're her mother? Lucia nodded slowly, tears welling in her eyes. I didn't know what to do. I thought if I left her there, someone would find her, someone would help her. But I couldn't keep her. I was too afraid. Maria's heart broke as she listened to the woman's words. There was so much pain in her voice, so much fear. Lucia was a mother who had made a terrible choice, but she wasn't a heartless one. The guilt and confusion that clouded her eyes told the story of a woman lost in a world of torment. Maria stood there, frozen for a moment, trying to make sense of the woman in front of her. Lucia's appearance, unexpected and disheveled, left her speechless. The story she had been piecing together about Shadow and Sophia suddenly collided with this new, unexpected reality. The woman standing before her was the key to everything, yet she looked like she had been through a war of her own. The layers of her past, of why she had left her child in such a dangerous position, were hidden beneath the surface, and Maria couldn't help but feel a surge of sympathy mixed with confusion. You're her mother? Maria repeated softly, as if saying the words aloud would make them more real. She had been so focused on Sophia's survival, on Shadow's heroism, that she hadn't imagined this moment, hadn't expected to see Lucia standing before her in such a fragile state. Lucia nodded again, her hands trembling as she wiped a tear from her cheek. I thought I could protect her, but I couldn't. I couldn't keep her safe, not the way I needed to. I thought if I left her with the dog, maybe someone good would find her. Someone who could take care of her. Maria's chest tightened. The pain in Lucia's voice was raw, like a wound that had never fully healed. You left her with Shadow, Maria murmured, the realization sinking in. You knew Shadow would find her. Lucia's face crumpled, and she looked down, avoiding Maria's gaze. I thought he would take care of her. He's always been around. I've seen him in the neighborhood. I fed him when I could, but I wasn't in a place to care for her. I had no choice. Her voice broke on the last word, and she swallowed hard. I didn't want her to die out there, but I couldn't keep her. Maria felt a knot of compassion form in her chest. She couldn't imagine the kind of pain that had driven Lucia to make such a drastic decision. There was a difference between abandonment out of neglect and abandonment born from a place of fear and desperation. And in Lucia's eyes, Maria saw that fear. The fear of an abusive partner, the fear of being unable to provide for her child, the fear of everything falling apart. Maria took a step toward Lucia, her heart torn. She wanted to be angry, to ask why she had done this, to demand answers. But the desperation in Lucia's eyes made that impossible. Instead, Maria's instinct was to help, to understand. Tell me what happened, Maria asked gently, her voice soft, understanding. What were you going through when you left her in that alley? Why couldn't you keep her? Lucia hesitated, her hands shaking as she tried to steady herself. I was with someone, a man, Miguel. He's not a good person. He wanted me to get rid of the baby. He said she would ruin everything for us. He was threatening me and I was so scared. I thought if I left her with the dog, she'd be safe. I thought he would protect her. And I thought it was my only choice. Her words came out in a rush, as if telling the story for the first time was ripping the bandages off wounds she had buried. Maria's heart ached as she listened to the pain in Lucia's voice. This wasn't the story of a mother who didn't care. This was a woman trapped in a cycle of abuse and fear, unable to see any other way out. You were scared, Maria said softly, her voice full of empathy. You thought this was the only way to keep Sophia safe. Lucia nodded, her face pale. I never meant to hurt her. I never wanted to put her in danger. But I didn't have anyone else. Miguel was controlling me. I thought if I left her there, the dog would find her, someone would help her. I didn't know what else to do. The pieces of the puzzle were finally starting to fit together for Maria. Shadow's connection to Sophia wasn't just happenstance. It wasn't just the desperate actions of a stray dog wandering the streets. No, it was something more. Something deeper. Shadow had been there, watching over the baby before the night he found her. He had been a silent guardian, and somehow, through some strange twist of fate, he had found the child when she needed him most. Maria turned to Shadow, who was now sitting up on his bed, watching the exchange between them. His tail gave a soft thump against the blanket, his eyes full of an understanding that went beyond what Maria could comprehend. He had been there. He had been a protector, even when he was weak, even when he had no reason to trust the world around him. Maria looked back at Lucia, her heart heavy with the weight of the moment. We need to get you help, Maria said, her voice firm now, filled with the strength of someone who knew what needed to be done. You don't have to do this alone. You don't have to live like this anymore. Lucia's eyes filled with tears, and she collapsed onto the bed beside Shadow. I don't know how to make it right. I've lost everything. I don't deserve to have her. I was just trying to survive. Maria knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. You made a choice out of fear, Lucia, but that doesn't mean you can't turn things around. You can still make things right. It's not too late. As Lucia sobbed quietly, Maria looked over at Shadow, whose presence seemed to calm the room. Shadow, the dog who had saved them both. Shadow, who had come into their lives with no warning, but had become the bridge between two broken souls, reminding them both that even in the darkest of times, there was always a chance for healing. The weeks that followed Lucia's unexpected arrival were a blur for Maria. The hospital visits, the endless questions about the past, and the slow rebuilding of trust between mother and child. All of it felt like a delicate dance, each day an uncertain step forward. Lucia, despite her past, was trying. She had agreed to seek help, and with Maria's encouragement, she started attending therapy sessions, determined to break free from the grip of her abusive relationship with Miguel. Maria spent more time with the baby than ever before, and Sophia's condition improved steadily. The doctors had been amazed at how quickly she recovered from the exposure, but there were still concerns about her long-term emotional development. Maria had no experience with caring for an infant beyond the basics, but she was learning quickly. Every smile Sophia gave, every little sound she made, felt like a milestone. At the same time, Shadow's recovery continued at the clinic. He was still a long way from being fully healed, but every day he grew stronger. His wounds were closing, and the malnourishment that had ravaged his body was slowly being reversed. Maria visited him every day, sitting with him for hours, and each time she left, she felt a little lighter, knowing he was on the road to recovery. His bond with Sophia had only grown, too. Shadow watched over her, a silent guardian who never strayed too far from the baby, always ensuring she was safe. But despite their progress, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that there were still unanswered questions. About Lucia, about Shadow, and about how their stories were meant to come together. Every time she looked at Shadow, she couldn't help but wonder. What had happened to him before he became a stray? Why had he been abandoned just like the baby? One afternoon, Maria sat on the porch of her home, a cup of tea in hand, as the sun dipped lower in the sky. The air was crisp with the arrival of autumn, and the leaves danced in the wind, swirling across the ground like little reminders of change. It had been a quiet day, one filled with routine, but Maria found herself lost in thought once again, staring into the distance, her mind racing. Lucia was inside, reading a book as she tried to find some peace of her own. After a lifetime of uncertainty, Maria could see the walls Lucia had built around herself starting to soften. It wasn't perfect, and there were still many challenges ahead. But there was a chance. And that chance was what kept Maria going. "Hey, Shadow," she whispered, the dog lying beside her, his head resting on her feet. "Do you ever think about what your life was like before?" The dog shifted, his eyes soft and full of understanding, though Maria knew he couldn't answer her in words. But there was something in the way he looked at her, the way he was always there, that made her feel like he understood her unspoken questions. Just then, Maria's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, expecting an update on Lucia's therapy session. But instead, the message on the screen froze her in place. "Ms. Reyes, we found something important. Please come to the clinic as soon as you can." It was from Dr. Patel. Maria's heart pounded in her chest as she stood up, quickly dropping the phone back into her pocket. Shadow looked up at her, sensing the change in her energy. "What is it, girl?" Maria murmured to him as she walked toward the door, slipping her jacket on. The clinic was only a few blocks away, but as Maria drove through the streets, she couldn't shake the feeling that something big was about to happen. The tension was building inside her, and her mind raced with possibilities. What could Dr. Patel have found? Was it about Shadow? Was it about Lucia? Or was it something related to the baby? She arrived at the clinic a few minutes later, breathless as she rushed inside. Dr. Patel was waiting for her in the same room where they had last discussed Shadow's recovery. The moment she entered, Dr. Patel stood up, her face serious. "I didn't want to worry you," Dr. Patel began, "but we've uncovered something significant about Shadow's past. Something that could change everything." Maria felt the world shift beneath her feet. What could it be? What was this new piece of the puzzle? Maria's heart raced as she sat down across from Dr. Patel, her mind reeling. She wasn't sure what to expect, but the weight of the moment made her feel as if something important was finally coming into focus. Dr. Patel paused for a moment, her hands clasped together as she looked at Maria. "It's been difficult to track down much about Shadow's past, as you know, but we've been doing a deeper dive and we found something in the records, a possible connection to a local family. A family who might have once owned him." Maria blinked in surprise. "A family? You mean he wasn't always a stray?" Dr. Patel nodded slowly. "It appears that Shadow was adopted by a family a few years ago. We haven't been able to find them directly yet, but we've located a few records. He had an ID tag at one point, and according to some old veterinary files, he was brought in for his vaccinations not long before he ended up on the streets. I think this dog might have been part of a family that lived nearby. But something happened, something that led to him being abandoned." Maria's mind raced as she processed the information. Shadow had once had a family, a home, people who loved him, and then, for reasons unknown, he had been discarded. The pain of that hit her harder than she expected. How could anyone do that? Maria whispered, more to herself than to Dr. Patel. The doctor sighed, her eyes sympathetic. "It's a difficult reality, but it happens more often than you might think. Families move, sometimes they leave pets behind, or worse, they just let them go when things get tough. It's not right, and it's heartbreaking, but it's a pattern we see too often." Maria leaned back in her chair, overwhelmed by the weight of the new information. Shadow had been loved, had been part of someone's life, and yet somehow, that all had fallen apart. What had happened to him? Why had he been abandoned? And more importantly, why had he come to the alley that night to save Sophia? "Is there any way to contact this family?" Maria asked, her voice tinged with hope. Dr. Patel shook her head. "Unfortunately, the records we found are old, and the information we have is incomplete. There's no way to know where they went or why Shadow ended up on the streets. But we have a few more leads we can follow, and I'm going to do my best to track them down. If we can find them, maybe we can get some answers, not just for Shadow, but for you, for all of you." Maria's heart swelled with a mixture of gratitude and sadness. She had wanted to know the truth about Shadow's past, but now that she was getting closer to it, the reality felt heavy. The mystery of his abandonment wasn't just his pain. It was the pain of someone else's brokenness. And Shadow had been caught in the middle of it all. As she stood up to leave, Maria felt a sense of determination she hadn't expected. Shadow's past might have been filled with pain, but his future was in her hands now, and she wasn't going to let his past define the rest of his life. He had saved Sophia. He had saved them all, and it was time for her to give him the love and care he deserved. "Thank you, Dr. Patel," Maria said, her voice firm but filled with emotion. "I'll wait to hear more from you, but I'm going to do everything I can for him. He deserves a chance to heal, just like the baby." Dr. Patel smiled softly. "I know you will. You're already doing more than most people would. Shadow is lucky to have you, Maria." Maria smiled back, a sense of warmth filling her. As she left the clinic, she felt a new kind of hope in her heart. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it would be worth it. Shadow had shown her that sometimes the most unexpected heroes were the ones who had suffered the most. And now, it was her turn to show him that he wasn't alone anymore. Later that evening, when Maria returned home, she found Lucia sitting on the couch, a worried expression on her face. Sophia was sleeping soundly in her bassinet nearby, her tiny form rising and falling with each gentle breath. "Hey," Maria said softly, walking over to Lucia. "How was your day?" Lucia looked up at her, her eyes still full of uncertainty. "I'm trying, Maria. I really am. But sometimes it feels like it's too much. I don't know if I can be what she needs, what she deserves." Maria sat down beside her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You can do this, Lucia. You're already doing better than you think. It's not about being perfect. It's about trying every single day. And I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Lucia's eyes softened, and a tear slipped down her cheek. "I just want her to have a better life. I don't want her to grow up like I did." Maria nodded, understanding more than Lucia could know. The pain of a troubled past, the fear of repeating old mistakes. It was something Maria was familiar with. But what mattered now was that they had each other, and together they would heal. Shadow, too, would heal. They all would. As Maria looked over at Shadow, who lay peacefully by the door, she felt an overwhelming sense of connection. Between him, between Sophia, and between herself. The pieces of their broken lives were slowly coming together, and although they would never forget the pain of the past, they were learning how to live in the present, with hope for the future. Together they would heal. Together they would rebuild. The weeks had passed in a quiet blur, the days filled with small victories and challenges alike. Maria had been doing everything in her power to help Lucia adjust, to help Shadow heal, and to care for the baby who had stolen her heart in the most unexpected way. Sophia was growing stronger every day, her once fragile frame now steadily gaining weight and energy. Her eyes sparkled with curiosity as she reached for Maria's finger, her first smile a sight that made Maria's heart swell with joy. But it wasn't just Sophia who was healing. Shadow, too, was making progress, his body slowly regaining the strength it had lost. He was no longer the emaciated dog that had stumbled through the snow that night, his ribs jutting out from starvation. His fur had thickened, and his movements were less stiff. His bond with Maria had grown stronger than ever. Every day, he greeted her with a wagging tail, and every night, he slept at the foot of her bed, a silent guardian who had become an irreplaceable part of her life. Lucia, too, was beginning to find her footing. Her therapy sessions were helping, and she was learning how to break free from the trauma that had defined so much of her life. Maria could see the small changes in her. She was no longer as fearful, no longer as closed off. She laughed more often now, and when she looked at Sophia, there was a softness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. But despite the progress, there was a lingering feeling of unease that Maria couldn't shake. The investigation into the circumstances surrounding Sophia's abandonment had stalled, and though she had been making some progress with learning about Shadow's past, there were still too many unanswered questions. The more time passed, the more Maria realized that there was a deeper connection between Shadow and Sophia, something that went beyond mere coincidence. And as she sat in her living room one evening, watching Shadow curl up by the fireplace while Lucia played with Sophia on the floor, a thought occurred to her. What if their connection wasn't just about saving one another? What if it was about healing something far more profound, something she didn't yet understand? Maria shook her head, dismissing the thought for now. There would be time to figure it out later. For now, she was content with the life they had built together, even if it wasn't perfect. It wasn't about perfection. It was about the bonds they had forged and the love that had blossomed in the most unexpected of places. Later that night, as Maria prepared dinner, she heard the soft sound of knocking at her door. She wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment, a sense of unease settled over her. She glanced over at Shadow, who had immediately risen to his feet and was standing near the door, his body tense. "It's okay, Shadow," Maria murmured, but the dog didn't move. He remained alert, watching the door with focused attention. Maria cautiously approached the door, her heart beginning to beat faster. She opened it slowly, and standing there was a man she didn't recognize. Tall, with dark eyes and a serious expression, he looked out of place in the quiet neighborhood. His presence felt almost like a warning. "Can I help you?" Maria asked, her voice calm but wary. The man studied her for a moment before speaking. "Are you Maria Reyes?" Maria nodded, her hand instinctively resting on the doorframe. "Yes, that's me. Who are you?" The man took a step closer, his gaze shifting to Shadow, who was now growling softly in the background. "I'm Detective James Morales. I've been investigating the case of the abandoned baby. I need to ask you a few questions." Maria's stomach twisted with a mix of surprise and unease. She had expected the investigation to continue, but she hadn't anticipated a visit from the detective himself. "What's this about?" Maria asked, her voice steady but her heart racing. "I'm here because we've made a breakthrough in the investigation," Detective Morales said. "I know you've been doing everything you can to care for the baby, but there are some things you need to know. It's important." Maria's mind raced. What had they discovered? Had they found out more about Sophia's mother? Was there any progress on finding the people responsible for abandoning her? The detective's serious tone only deepened the pit in her stomach. "Please," Maria said, opening the door wider. "Come in." Detective Morales stepped inside, his gaze quickly scanning the room. Shadow remained at his post, his eyes never leaving the detective, his growl growing louder. Maria could sense the tension in the air, the weight of the moment hanging over them both. "Is Shadow always like this?" Morales asked, his voice surprisingly gentle for a detective. "He's protective," Maria said softly, watching the dog carefully. "He's been like this ever since the night he saved Sophia. I think he senses when something's not right." Morales nodded, his expression still serious. "I can tell. He's a smart dog. But I'm here to talk to you about something that might be more difficult to hear." He paused, his eyes meeting hers. "We've made progress in the investigation, and I think it's important you know everything, especially what we've uncovered about Sophia's mother." Maria's heart skipped a beat. She had been hoping for good news, for something that would bring clarity, but the detective's somber tone told her this wasn't going to be easy. She motioned for him to sit. "Please go on," Maria said, trying to keep her voice steady. Morales took a seat, his gaze shifting to the baby, who was now sound asleep in her crib nearby. He seemed to gather his thoughts for a moment before continuing. "After a thorough investigation, we found out that Lucia, Sophia's mother, has been through a lot more than we initially thought. We discovered records that show she had been living in an abusive relationship for months, maybe even years. Her boyfriend, Miguel, had been controlling and violent. We believe he's the one who pressured her to abandon Sophia, and that's why she left her in that alley." Maria's heart sank. She had suspected something dark had been at play, but hearing the detective confirm it made the weight of the situation even more real. Lucia hadn't been callous. She hadn't abandoned her daughter out of neglect. She had been trapped in a cycle of fear and control. "But there's more," Morales continued, his voice lowering. We managed to locate Miguel. He's been hiding out, but we found his location this morning, and we're planning on moving in soon to apprehend him. He's dangerous, Maria. He's a threat not only to Lucia, but to Sofia as well. And we need to protect both of them. Maria was silent for a moment, processing the information. The image of Sofia's mother, sitting on the couch and weeping with regret, replayed in her mind. Lucia hadn't abandoned her child willingly. She had been driven to desperation. What happens now? Maria asked, her voice quieter than before. We're taking every precaution, Morales said. We've increased the security around Lucia and Sofia. But there's something else I need to ask you. We need to know if you're willing to allow Shadow to be part of the protection plan. His instincts are incredible. If he senses Miguel nearby, he could be our eyes on the ground. He's already proven that he's capable of more than we thought. He could be a real asset to the case. Maria felt a rush of emotions. Shadow had already given so much. He had saved Sofia's life. And now, it seemed like he could be the one to help bring the man who had caused so much pain to justice. But could she really ask him to go through more? Could she ask the dog who had been through so much to take on this responsibility? Are you sure he's ready? Maria asked, her voice unsure. He's still recovering. I don't want to push him too far. Morales paused, looking at Shadow with a hint of admiration. I think he's more ready than you realize. His bond with Sofia and Lucia is strong. He's protective by nature, and if he feels the threat, he'll act. We wouldn't ask if we didn't think it was the right thing to do. Maria glanced at Shadow, who was still watching the detective, his eyes alert. There was something in those eyes that made her think he already understood. He had always been a protector. But this was different. This wasn't just about saving Sofia from the cold. It was about saving her from something far worse. I'll do it, Maria said, her decision clear. I'll help however I can. If Shadow can help stop him, then we'll do it. Morales gave her a nod of gratitude. Thank you, Maria. This is going to be a difficult road, but with Shadow's help, I think we'll have a much better chance of keeping Lucia and Sofia safe. Maria stood up, her legs shaking slightly. She wasn't sure what the next steps would look like, but she knew one thing. The stakes had just gotten higher. What started as a mission to save an abandoned baby had turned into something much bigger. Something that could change their lives forever. Shadow stood up as well, his movements slow but purposeful. His eyes locked on Maria as if waiting for her next command. Maria walked over to him, kneeling down to meet him at eye level. Are you ready for this, Shadow? She whispered, her voice full of emotion. The dog's tail gave a small, steady thump against the floor, as if to say that he was ready, that he had always been ready. Maria smiled softly, reaching out to pat his head. Good boy, she murmured. We'll face this together. Maria sat on the porch, her hands tightly gripping the mug of tea as she watched the sun dip below the horizon. The evening air was cool, and the world around her was settling into a quiet rhythm. It was a peaceful scene, a calm moment in what had been an otherwise turbulent few weeks. Yet, beneath the calm, Maria felt a gnawing tension in the pit of her stomach. The decision she had made, to allow Shadow to assist in the investigation, felt both right and terrifying. There was no turning back now. As the sun set, she turned her gaze to the house, where Lucia was sitting inside with Sofia, both of them cozy and content. Lucia had made great strides, and Maria had seen a new sense of purpose in her eyes lately. She was no longer the broken woman who had abandoned her child out of fear. Now Lucia was taking steps toward healing, not just for herself, but for Sofia. It was a complicated road ahead, but Maria had seen enough change to believe that the future was still full of possibilities. Shadow, lying at Maria's feet, raised his head at the sound of approaching footsteps. Maria smiled softly, absent-mindedly running her hand over his fur. He had become her constant companion, a presence that comforted her even on the hardest days. The bond they shared, built on shared trauma and mutual healing, was unlike anything she had ever known. And yet, as much as they had both healed, there was still so much more to be done. The knock at the door broke the stillness of the evening, and Maria's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't expecting anyone, and the late hour made it feel even more unsettling. Shadow immediately stood up, his muscles tense, a low growl rumbling from his chest. Maria's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't sure what to expect. Another unexpected visitor, or perhaps a sign that the investigation was about to take a dramatic turn. She quickly made her way to the door, Shadow following closely behind her. His protective instincts were heightened, and Maria couldn't help but admire his unwavering loyalty. He had become so much more than a dog to her. He was family, a guardian, a friend who understood without words. Maria opened the door cautiously, and her breath caught when she saw Detective Morales standing in the doorway, his face serious. "Detective," she greeted, her voice steady but laced with curiosity. "What brings you here?" "I'm sorry to drop by so late, Ms. Reyes," Morales said, his tone apologetic but urgent. "I wanted to give you an update. There's been a development in the case, and I thought you should know." Maria's heart raced as she stepped aside to let him in. She could feel the tension in the air, the gravity of the moment weighing heavily on her shoulders. Whatever news the detective had, she wasn't sure if she was prepared for it. Morales entered, and Shadow immediately moved to stand between him and Maria, his posture still tense. It was clear that the detective's presence was making him uneasy. "It's okay, Shadow," Maria murmured, gently petting his head to calm him down. But the dog remained vigilant, his dark eyes never leaving the detective. "I can see he's on edge," Morales said, glancing at Shadow. "I won't take much of your time, but we've gotten some new information, and I think it's important to share it with you." Maria felt her pulse quicken. "What kind of information?" she asked, her voice betraying the urgency she felt inside. Morales hesitated for a moment, his eyes flicking to Shadow before meeting Maria's gaze. "We've confirmed that Miguel Santos, the man Lucia was with, has been seen in the area. We believe he's been watching the house for a while now." Maria's stomach twisted at the mention of Miguel's name. The threat he posed to Lucia and Sofia was very real, and now it seemed like he was getting closer. "What does that mean?" she asked, her voice low. "We're preparing to move in on him," Morales replied, his voice firm. "But I need you to understand that this isn't just a routine operation. Miguel is dangerous. He's been on the run for weeks, and he won't go down without a fight. If he thinks he's being cornered, he could make a move on Lucia or Sofia." Maria's blood ran cold at the thought. They had been living under a false sense of security, thinking that they were safe, but the reality was much darker. Miguel was still out there, and his anger, his need for control, could lead him to do anything. "We're going to have extra patrols in the area," Morales continued, "but we need you to be on high alert. If Shadow senses anything, we need to know. I'm trusting you to keep an eye out." Maria nodded, though her mind was racing. This wasn't just about protecting themselves anymore. It was about staying one step ahead of a man who would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. "I understand," she said, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. "I'll keep you updated," Morales said. "But for now, stay vigilant. We're doing everything we can, but this is going to get dangerous before it gets better." Maria stood in the doorway watching the detective leave. Shadow was still on alert, his eyes trained on the door long after the detective had disappeared. Maria closed the door slowly, her thoughts spinning. The peace they had fought so hard to build was now under threat, and she couldn't help but feel the weight of it all. She turned toward the living room, where Lucia and Sofia were. Her heart ached at the thought of them being in danger, but she knew that she couldn't let fear control her. They had already come so far, and they weren't about to let Miguel tear everything apart. Shadow followed her inside, his presence a silent reassurance. Together, they would face whatever came next. Maria moved to the living room, where Lucia was sitting with Sofia, the baby nestled in her arms. The sight of them, both so peaceful, was a sharp contrast to the storm of thoughts swirling in Maria's mind. The detective's warning about Miguel felt like an ominous cloud hanging over them, and for the first time since everything started, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that danger was closer than ever. Lucia looked up as Maria entered, concern flashing across her face when she saw the serious look on Maria's. What happened? Is everything okay? Maria sat down on the couch beside Lucia, her gaze flickering to Sophia before resting on Lucia. Miguel is still out there. We just got word that he's been spotted nearby. The detective is preparing to move in on him, but we need to stay vigilant. He's dangerous, Lucia, and he knows where we are. Lucia's face drained of color as the reality of the situation sank in. She tightened her grip around Sophia, instinctively pulling her closer. I didn't want him to find us. I thought we were safe. You are safe, Maria said, her voice firm but gentle. We're going to keep you safe, I promise. But right now, we need to stay alert. The detective says we have to be prepared for anything. Shadow, who had been pacing nearby, stopped and sat down next to them. His eyes locked on Maria, his presence an unspoken assurance that he wouldn't let anything happen to them. Maria reached down and stroked his fur, feeling the tension in his muscles. He understood the gravity of the situation, just as she did. Maria, I'm scared, Lucia whispered, her voice breaking. What if he comes after us? What if he finds us and takes Sophia? Maria's heart went out to Lucia. She knew the fear that gripped her wasn't just for herself. It was for her daughter, the one person she had tried so desperately to protect. But Maria also knew that they couldn't let fear dictate their actions. They had come this far, and together they would make it through. We won't let that happen, Maria said, her voice steady. You and Sophia are safe here. Shadow is here and we have the police. We're not alone in this. Lucia nodded, though her eyes remained filled with worry. I just don't want to lose her. I'm all she has. Maria reached out and placed a hand on Lucia's, offering the comfort she so desperately needed. And you're all she has too. You've made it this far, Lucia. You're stronger than you think. For a moment, the room was silent, the weight of the situation settling in. Maria could feel the tension in the air, like a storm about to break. She knew they had to stay vigilant, that the next few days could be the most dangerous yet. But she also knew that they had something Miguel didn't: each other. Later that night, after Lucia had put Sophia to bed, Maria sat alone in the living room, the quiet of the house heavy around her. Shadow was resting by the door, his eyes half closed but still alert, ever watchful. The stillness in the house was almost eerie, but Maria found it comforting. For the first time in days, she allowed herself a few moments of peace. They were all safe for now, and that was all she could ask for. Her phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was a message from Dr. Patel. Shadow is doing well. His progress is steady, and he's adjusting to the new routine. Keep up the good work. Maria smiled softly at the message. Shadow had come so far, both physically and emotionally. He was no longer the broken dog who had stumbled into her life. He was her protector, her companion, and a symbol of resilience in a world that had tried to break them all. The thought of how far they had come, of everything they had survived, filled her with a quiet sense of pride. But as much as Maria tried to hold onto that sense of calm, the worry gnawed at her. Miguel's presence loomed over them like a shadow, and there was no escaping the reality that danger was always lurking just outside their door. As the night stretched on, Maria's thoughts turned back to Lucia and Sophia. She wondered what the future held for them, if they would ever truly be free of Miguel's influence. Would Lucia be able to rebuild her life, to be the mother she wanted to be? And what about Shadow? Would his past always haunt him, or would he find peace in the home they had built together? Maria's eyes drifted toward the window, her thoughts as clouded as the sky outside. The future was uncertain, and the storm that loomed on the horizon was still waiting to break. But in that moment, with Shadow resting at her feet and Lucia and Sophia safely inside, Maria knew one thing for sure. They would face whatever came next, together. The night was still, the only sound the soft rustling of leaves outside as a cool breeze swept through the quiet streets. Maria sat on the couch, her eyes flicking nervously to the clock every few minutes. The weight of the detective's words echoed in her mind. Miguel was close. He was out there somewhere watching them, waiting, She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being hunted, that every moment brought them closer to a confrontation that none of them were truly ready for. Shadow, ever watchful, lay by the door. His ears perked as he seemed to sense the unease in the air. Maria reached out, her fingers gently brushing the top of his head. He let out a soft sigh, his eyes meeting hers. There was an understanding between them now, a silent bond that went beyond words. They were both on edge, both aware of the danger looming just beyond their doorstep. It had been a long day, full of uncertainty, fear, and the weight of the decisions that had been made. Lucia had spent most of the afternoon pacing, her anxiety palpable as she wondered what would happen next. Sophia had been fussy, and Maria found herself constantly checking the baby monitor, feeling the need to keep a watchful eye on every corner of the house. The detective's warning had planted a seed of fear in her mind, and now every noise, every shift in the house felt magnified. Maria knew she couldn't stay on edge forever. They had to stay calm for Sophia's sake, for Lucia's, and for their own. But the threat was real, and with every passing hour, it seemed closer. The police were on alert, and there were extra patrols in the area, but Maria knew it wasn't enough. She had seen how desperate Miguel could be, and if he was cornered, he would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. Her thoughts were interrupted by the soft sound of footsteps approaching. She looked up, her heart racing as Lucia entered the room, her face pale and drawn. Maria could tell that her friend hadn't been able to shake the worry either. "They've called for backup," Lucia said, her voice trembling slightly. "The police are making sure they're ready, but I don't know if that'll be enough. What if he comes after us first?" Maria stood up, her hands instinctively reaching out to comfort Lucia. "We've been through worse than this, Lucia. You've survived worse. And we'll get through this together, I promise. Shadow and I, we're here. We won't let anything happen to you or Sophia." Lucia swallowed hard, her gaze dropping to the baby, who was now asleep in her crib. "I just want to keep her safe. I never wanted any of this. I thought I was protecting her by leaving her with the dog. But now I'm not sure I've done anything right." Maria's heart ached for Lucia. She could see the guilt, the weight of her past mistakes, pressing down on her. "You did what you thought was best. You were trying to protect her, Lucia. That's all that matters now. We're moving forward, not looking back. We're building something new, and we have a chance to make it right." Lucia nodded, wiping her eyes, but the fear was still evident in her expression. Maria knew that no matter how many times she reassured her, it wouldn't be enough. The fear would always be there, lingering in the background, until Miguel was caught and they could finally begin to heal fully. Suddenly, Shadow stood up, his ears flat against his head, and he growled low in his throat. Maria froze, her pulse quickening. The growl was different this time, deeper, more urgent. Shadow's instincts had never been wrong before, and she could sense that something was off. "Shadow," Maria whispered, stepping cautiously toward him. "What is it, boy?" The dog's eyes were fixed on the door, his body tense. Maria turned toward Lucia, her expression serious. "Stay with Sophia. Don't open the door for anyone. I'll check it out." Lucia's face paled. "Maria, what is it? What's happening?" "Stay inside," Maria said, her voice calm but filled with authority. "I'll be right back. Lock the door behind me." As Maria stepped cautiously toward the front door, Shadow followed closely behind, his growl becoming louder. Every instinct told her something was wrong, that danger had arrived. She reached for the door handle, her fingers shaking slightly, but before she could turn it, a loud bang echoed from outside, followed by a series of rapid knocks. Maria's heart nearly stopped in her chest. This wasn't a random knock. It wasn't the police. She quickly backed away from the door, her mind racing as she realized what was happening. Miguel had found them. Shadow barked furiously, his tail stiff and his body ready to spring into action. Maria's heart pounded as she realized that the worst-case scenario had just become their reality. Maria's pulse quickened, and for a moment, she stood frozen in the hallway, her mind struggling to catch up with the reality of the situation. The knocks on the door grew louder, more insistent, and Shadow's growls intensified. He was no longer just a dog. He was a protector, and he understood that they were in immediate danger. "Stay back," Maria whispered to Shadow, her voice shaking as she slowly backed toward the living room. Her hand instinctively reached for the phone in her pocket. She needed to call the police immediately. But before she could even dial, there was another knock, this time followed by a voice. "Maria, I know you're in there. I know you're hiding the baby." Maria's breath caught in her throat. The voice was low, menacing, and unmistakable. It was Miguel. She had heard him yell before, when he tried to control Lucia when he'd thrown his fits. But now, there was a madness in his voice, an edge that sent chills down her spine. Lucia was still in the living room, holding Sophia close to her chest, her face pale and wide-eyed. Maria knew she couldn't let him in. She couldn't risk exposing Lucia and Sophia to him, not like this. The detective had warned them. Miguel wouldn't hesitate to do anything to get what he wanted. And right now, it sounded like he wanted revenge. Maria's fingers hovered over the phone as she dialed the police. But before she could press call, Shadow suddenly lunged toward the door. His teeth bared, his body tense and ready. It was clear that the dog had made a decision, and there was no turning back. Maria reached for his collar, but the dog was already charging toward the door, his bark echoing through the house. "Shadow, no!" Maria cried out, but the dog wasn't listening. His instincts were in full control, and he was determined to defend them no matter the cost. Without thinking, Maria moved forward, grabbing the handle of the door, but she stopped just before opening it. The reality of what might happen on the other side made her hesitate. She had to think fast. Shadow could handle a lot, but she wasn't sure how much he could withstand against someone like Miguel. Another bang on the door jolted Maria into action. She turned to Lucia, her voice urgent. "Stay in here, lock the door, and don't open it no matter what." Lucia, wide-eyed with fear, nodded quickly, her grip tightening on Sophia. Maria's heart ached for the woman, for the fear she could see reflected in her eyes. But there was no time to dwell on it. She had to make sure the baby and Lucia were safe first. Maria cautiously approached the door, her heart pounding. Shadow stood behind her, his eyes locked on the door, every muscle in his body tense. The next knock came, and then Miguel's voice again, louder this time. "I know you're in there. You can't hide forever." Maria swallowed hard, glancing back at the living room. Lucia had locked the door, but Maria could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She had to buy them time. She had to stop Miguel from barging in and harming anyone. With one final glance at Shadow, Maria took a deep breath and threw the door open, just enough to see the figure standing outside. Miguel's face was twisted with rage, his eyes wild and bloodshot, his body shaking with fury. "What do you want?" Maria demanded, trying to sound confident, though her voice wavered slightly. She could see him holding something in his hand, but she couldn't quite make it out. Miguel's lip curled into a sneer. "You think you can hide from me? I'm not leaving without her. She's mine, and I'm taking her one way or another." Maria's mind raced. She had no idea what he was holding in his hand, but the coldness in his voice sent a shiver through her. He was desperate, willing to do anything to take control again. Before Maria could react, Shadow moved. The dog, who had been silently waiting behind her, charged at Miguel, leaping forward with the ferocity of an animal protecting its pack. Miguel cursed, stumbling back as Shadow's teeth snapped dangerously close to him. The man swung at Shadow, but the dog was too quick, dodging the attack and lunging again. "Get off me!" Miguel screamed, trying to shove Shadow away. But Shadow wasn't relenting. His growls echoed through the air, every inch of his body taut with the drive to protect Maria and the others. Maria's heart pounded as she watched the struggle unfold. Shadow was holding his own, but she knew he couldn't keep this up forever. He was still recovering, still weak from the trauma he had endured. This fight wasn't something she could ignore. "Shadow!" Maria shouted, her voice breaking through the chaos. "Get back!" But the dog wasn't listening. His eyes were fixed on Miguel with one purpose, keeping him away from Maria and the baby. Miguel's fury exploded as he grabbed at a nearby brick, his face contorted with rage. With a wild swing, he aimed at Shadow, trying to land a blow. Maria's heart skipped a beat. If that hit connected. Without thinking, Maria rushed forward. "No!" she screamed, throwing herself between Miguel and Shadow. Her body collided with Miguel, knocking him off balance just enough for Shadow to pull away. For a moment, the room was filled with silence, and Maria's breath came in shallow gasps. Miguel staggered back, his eyes flashing with shock at her intervention. "You're insane," Maria spat, anger rising as she glared at him. "You're not taking anyone. Not now, not ever." Miguel's laugh was hollow, almost insane. "You think you can stop me?" He stepped forward, fists clenched, his eyes narrowing as he glared at Maria and Shadow. "You won't have a chance." Maria could feel the danger in the air, thick and suffocating. But for the first time since he'd appeared, she wasn't afraid. She wasn't going to let this man destroy the life they had fought so hard to build. Shadow stood at her side, his eyes locked on Miguel, ready for whatever came next. The morning sun filtered through the curtains, casting a warm glow over the room. But for Maria, the light seemed like a distant illusion. The chaos of the previous night still lingered in the air, the fear and adrenaline slowly ebbing away, leaving only the quiet aftermath. She stood at the window, her gaze lost in the distance, her mind still reeling from the events that had unfolded. Miguel had been caught. It had taken hours of intense, heart-pounding moments, but the police had managed to subdue him. Shadow had done his part, fighting fiercely to protect them. But Maria knew the consequences of the battle were far from over. They had won, but not without scars on both the body and the soul. Maria took a deep breath, steadying herself as she glanced over at the baby's crib, where Sophia was still sleeping soundly. Despite everything, the baby had been untouched, safe in the arms of the woman who had loved her, who had fought for her, and who had now begun the slow process of healing. Lucia had been by her side all night, both physically and emotionally drained from the ordeal, but she had made it through. Together, they had made it through. Shadow, resting near the door, seemed to understand the peace that had settled in the house. His head lifted as Maria moved across the room, and his eyes followed her every step. Despite the exhaustion in his bones, despite the wounds that would take time to heal, he was still alert, still protective, still the hero who had saved them all. Maria knelt beside him, her hand gently running through his fur, and for a moment, the world outside seemed to fade away. She looked at the dog, her companion, her protector, the one who had shown her what it meant to fight not just for survival, but for love. Shadow had been a symbol of resilience and loyalty, and she realized that without him, none of this would have been possible. "You did it, Shadow," Maria whispered softly, her voice thick with emotion. "You kept us safe. You saved us all." The dog's tail thumped softly against the floor in response, as if acknowledging the truth in her words. Shadow had been through so much, and now, despite the hardships, he was here with her, standing strong. As Maria continued to stroke his head, she felt a sense of calm wash over her. It wasn't just the end of one chapter. It was the beginning of something new, something that was full of hope, healing, and most importantly, love. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts, and she straightened up, glancing toward the hallway. The sound was followed by the soft voice of the officer who had been stationed outside the night before. "Maria, it's me. Can I come in?" Maria nodded, calling out, "Of course, come in." The officer entered, his face still a bit weary from the events of the night. "I just wanted to update you on the situation. Miguel's in custody, and it looks like he'll be facing serious charges. The investigation will continue, but for now, you're safe. No more threats. No more danger." Maria let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. It was over. Finally, Miguel was no longer a threat. The weight that had been crushing her chest, the constant fear that she lived with every day, was now gone. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe it was really over. "Thank you," Maria said, her voice full of gratitude. "Thank you for everything." The officer gave her a nod. "You've been through a lot, but you've made it through. You should be proud." As he left, Maria walked back to the window, her heart lighter than it had been in what felt like years. Shadow stood up, walking over to her side, as if sensing the change in the air. She looked down at him and smiled, the weight of the past finally lifting. "We did it, boy. We made it through." The sound of a baby's cry broke the silence, and Maria quickly moved to check on Sophia. She lifted the baby from her crib, her heart swelling as Sophia's tiny hands grabbed onto her fingers. The little girl looked up at her with wide eyes, her face lighting up with a smile that was pure and innocent, untouched by the world's darkness. Maria couldn't help but smile back. This was what it had all been for. This moment, this family. Lucia walked into the room, her eyes tired but full of gratitude. "She's awake," Lucia said, her voice soft. Maria nodded, holding Sophia up in front of her. "She's safe now. You both are." Lucia came over, taking a seat next to Maria, and for the first time in a long time, they shared a quiet moment together. There was still so much to work through, so much healing to be done. But in this moment, there was only peace. Maria looked at the woman beside her, at the baby in her arms, and at Shadow, who lay quietly at their feet, and she realized that this was what family meant. Not just the people who shared your blood, but the ones who walked beside you through the storm, the ones who fought with you when the world seemed to turn against you. Family was love, and love was the foundation of everything they had fought for. The past could not be changed, and the future was still uncertain, but one thing was clear. Together they had survived. Together they would rebuild. And together they would be okay. The room was still, save for the soft cooing of Sophia in Maria's arms and the steady sound of Shadow's breathing. The threat of Miguel had dissipated, but Maria knew that the scars would remain, both for her and for Lucia. Yet, as she looked around at the peaceful scene before her, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. They had made it. They had survived the worst of it, and now they had a chance to heal. Lucia, sitting next to her, looked down at Sophia, who had fallen back to sleep in Maria's arms. Her face, though tired, was soft with relief. "I never thought it would end like this," Lucia said quietly, almost to herself. "After everything, I didn't think there would be an end. Just more fear, more running." Maria reached out, placing a hand on Lucia's shoulder. "Sometimes, when you've been running for so long, you forget how to stop. But you're here now. You're safe. And so is Sophia. That's what matters." Lucia met her gaze, her eyes filled with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you, Maria. She paused, choking back tears. "I never imagined I'd be here, with her in my arms again. But you saved us. You gave us a chance to be a family again." Maria squeezed Lucia's shoulder gently, a small, reassuring smile on her face. "We did it together, and that's what family is all about. Fighting for each other, even when the odds are against us." For a long moment, there was nothing but the sound of Sophia's soft breaths and the quiet comfort of being together. Shadow, now settled next to the couch, turned his head and gave Maria a small, almost imperceptible wag of his tail, as if he, too, understood the significance of this moment. The doorbell rang, breaking the peaceful silence. Maria felt her heart skip a beat. After everything that had happened, the presence of another visitor, especially the police or the authorities, was both a relief and a source of anxiety. "I'll get it," Maria said softly, standing up with Sophia still in her arms. She moved toward the door, feeling the protective weight of Shadow's eyes following her. There was no way she would ever allow herself to feel unprepared again. When Maria opened the door, she was surprised to see Dr. Patel standing on the other side, a warm smile on her face. The veterinarian's presence had become a steady source of comfort over the past few weeks, and seeing her now brought a wave of relief. "Maria, I hope I'm not disturbing you," Dr. Patel said gently. "I just wanted to check on Shadow. I heard about the events last night, and I wanted to make sure he's doing okay." Maria smiled, stepping aside to let the doctor in. "Of course, he's doing well. Better than I could have hoped. It's been a tough night, but he's resting, just like the rest of us. Dr. Patel's eyes softened as she looked at the dog curled up by the door. He's a special one, that's for sure. I've worked with many animals over the years, but there's something about Shadow. He's a fighter, not just for himself, but for the people he loves. Maria nodded in agreement, her heart swelling with gratitude. He's more than a dog. He's family. I can see that, Dr. Patel said, her voice full of warmth. And as for the rest of you, you've all been through so much. I hope you know that you're not alone in this. I'm here for you, whenever you need anything. Maria felt her chest tighten with emotion. She hadn't realized just how much she needed that reassurance, how much she needed to hear that they weren't alone in this new chapter of their lives. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick with gratitude. The doctor gave her a knowing smile. No need to thank me. I'm just glad to see you all safe and sound. As Dr. Patel moved to check on Shadow, Maria stepped back into the living room, her thoughts turning once again to the future. It wasn't going to be easy. They still had a long way to go, a long road of healing and rebuilding. But for the first time in a long time, Maria could feel the weight of fear lifting. The storm had passed, and though the scars would remain, there was hope for the future. Lucia, still sitting on the couch, turned to Maria. What happens now? She asked softly, her voice filled with uncertainty. What do we do next? Maria sat down next to her, Sophia nestled safely in her arms. We move forward, she said, her voice steady with conviction. We focus on what matters now, healing, building a life together, and making sure Sophia grows up knowing love and safety. We take it one step at a time. Together. Lucia nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. Together? She repeated, as though the weight of the word gave her strength. For the first time since everything began, there was a quiet peace in the room, a peace born from resilience and love. Maria glanced at Shadow, lying at her feet, then back to Lucia and Sophia. Their journey was far from over, but in that moment, they had everything they needed, each other. And together they would face whatever came next.